Thank you for tuning in. This is Jackie Clement, Fair Media Council CEO and Executive Director. I'm here to say welcome to the Fair Media Council's annual news conference, Real and Powerful. Today's event features a panel discussion, Inside New York Politics Forecast 2022. And today's event is sponsored by Northwell Health, Henry Schein, Protiviti, St. Joseph's College, Bartow Law Firm, and Hofstra University. And we thank our sponsors for their support. Today's panel will be moderated by Julian Phillips, journalist, political analyst, and author. And joining him today will be Mike Dawidziak, President, Strategic Planning Systems, Yancey Roy, the Albany Bureau Chief of Newsday, Tim Scheld, News and Programming Director, WCBS Newsradio 880, and Harry Siegel, Senior Editor of The Daily Beast. Enjoy.
All right, well, welcome to Real and Powerful, and of course, the Inside New York Politics Forecast 2022. A lot to talk about this morning. You know, we're talking about, of course, New York City, Albany, the entire state, as a matter of fact, of course, Long Island. I consider these three areas a tale of three cities or tale of three counties. They're all different in many ways, but we're all intertwined as well. You know, there's so much to talk about, but I want to start off with what I consider now the epicenter of news with crime. And of course, last Friday, there were two police officers that were shot responding to a domestic violence issue in Harlem. Jason Rivera died, and we just heard yesterday late that Wilbert Moore also succumbed to his wounds as well. Mayor Eric Adams was heralded into office on the Law and Order platform, and he's somewhat of a tempest in a teapot right now, announcing several initiatives sounding strong. Tim, I want to start with you, with the mayor. He's talking about bringing back a very controversial aspect, plainclothes unit stop and frisk. There are people that seem to be supporting this initiative. What are your thoughts? How do you think he can handle all this and balance these issues with the community and the police as well?
Thanks, Julian, and it's good to see you, even if it's virtually. I think there's no argument that the city is in crisis. We are, as the mayor likes to say, awash in guns. That is the crisis. The police department faces an issue where every call they go on, there is a fear that they could be facing gunfire because there's so much out there. What did the mayor say this week? You know, when we take one gun off the streets, 5 more comes on from the pipeline. I do think that it is time for dramatic action. And when you lose 2 of the finest, when you lose 2 officers, it is a moment in time that people are on the same page. The community is mourning, the police department is mourning, the city is mourning. We find ourselves in a moment in time where maybe something can happen in the next few weeks. We see it every time we have that kind of great dagger-like pain when we lose people who are there to protect and save us. And the stories of these officers, and even the officer that survived, you know, they are heroic people, young officers who wanted to join the force to make a better community. And so we've now coalesced around the sadness, around the pain, and it is a moment in time. And I think the mayor has to be challenged, and Harry probably would agree with me, that whatever plan he has for plainclothes or out of uniform gun suppression groups, he's going to have to define it. I know he's been asked about it quite frequently this week, and he will be challenged on it. But he is going to have to toe the line to make sure that it's legal, to make sure that we don't go down the path of stop and frisk where there were a lot of mistakes made, and it was very harmful to the community. So, you know, the easy answer, Julian, is that the mayor is under the microscope with the plans that he's putting out, and he knows it. I can tell you that.
No, absolutely, Harry. I want you to follow up on that. I think the issue here is balance. There's no question that everybody's behind the effort to reduce crime in New York City, especially the community. And that's been a myth for so long here, especially in communities of color, that people that live in these communities are not behind the police. When you know, a lot of these places you go into, they want to see, when they see a cop, they want to see relief, not grief. With that said, though, it's going to be a balancing issue to deal with a plainclothes unit and how they respond and how you monitor and galvanize them. What are your thoughts on that?
We've had a whole series of anti-gun units and plainclothes units that have been put into existence, rebranded, removed, recreated. Like, this is a long, long circle. When Bill Bratton became Bill de Blasio's first commissioner, his whole origin story, as it were, was that he'd done stuff right when he'd been there with Rudy Giuliani. He'd left. The anti-gun units had gotten bigger and bigger and worse trained. You had younger and younger cops there, and things were bound to go wrong, and they had. And his watchword was balance, and not coincidentally, that's a word that Eric Adams has used frequently in talking about all this. So a few things to sort of go through. One question with balance is what the equilibrium we're talking about with every crime, every violent crime is a tragedy. There's going to be some of them in a city of nearly 9 million people now. So the violence numbers, the gun violence numbers, the murder numbers are way up from 2019. They seem to have plateaued since. This is part of a national trend. It's not just New York. It's not just new laws here that have made this happen, clearly. But the question is what Eric Adams can do to start bringing these down. And obviously, he'd hope to have a little more time to shift from rhetoric to practice. He had to roll this plan out very quickly. It was bookended by this shooting and one death of a police officer on the one hand, and then the second death right on the other. The second thing is Adams focused on this gun unit, and he talked about that during the campaign, but he spent a lot of time on things that are either A, long-term or root cause solutions, which are very important, but are not going to do anything about the immediate problems New York is facing and the sense of an unsafe or disorderly city that can eat everything up, including the need, especially in communities of color, for decent policing. And he spent a lot of time on state and federal things that it doesn't look like are going to happen. Joe Biden sent thoughts and prayers, literally, but he's not going to do anything about the iron pipeline. And of course, this iron pipeline is not anything new. In fact, this is going to get much, much worse for New York come the fall, when the Supreme Court almost certainly is going to knock down our gun license, New York City's gun licensing rules. And we're going to be a lot more like Chicago, where there's an Indiana next door and legally purchased guns can get used in crimes here all the time. That's going to be a major challenge. I'm sure he's prepared to address, but he has not rhetorically addressed at this point. And then one other thing with stop and frisk, which you mentioned. So stop and frisk is two different things. Stop and frisk became a shorthand for the severe overuse of stopping people, questioning them, frisking them, all that, under the Bloomberg administration, as those numbers exploded. And it's just a very ordinary policing tactic that the Supreme Court has signed off on and that gets used all the time, and that Eric Adams has emphatically said is part of his answer, which is striking, given that we're at this moment where two things are happening simultaneously. There's a big reform current, and that's how we end up with Alvin Bragg, the first African-American district attorney of Manhattan, who said, on day one, I'm going to change what my office is doing, and that we need to be decarceral in a lot of ways, as well as prosecutorial. And Eric Adams in the same election, a former police officer and a gadfly and reformer within there, but nonetheless, an officer for 22 years, who says that the public safety has to come first. And the reason that they have not clashed directly, Adams had his police commissioner shoot back at the memo, so to speak, while avoiding doing so himself, is because, in fact, both of them are trying to find that balance. They may be coming from different sides of the scale in effect, but they're both talking about having public safety and fairness and decency. And what's complicated is there's a tension there, not rhetorically, but in practice, where the tools that are available to Adams right now, like an anti-gun unit that's going out and looking for guns and is stopping people that do that. And you have guys, even if they're wearing some patch now, so they're not entirely plainclothes and they're supposed to be identifiable, are jumping out of cars and yelling at people who they think have guns, like you there right now, stop. That is a crude tool. Facial recognition is a dangerous tool he's talked about using, and he may need to, but those are in the short term for dealing with the immediate political crisis he faces, as there's this sense of insecurity in the city. People are getting shoved in front of trains. An 11-month-old infant was shot. a teenager in a McDonald's, these are the tools that are available to him. So if he can use those in a way where he can get some sign off from the left in the city and any help from Albany, he has some chance. But a lot of what he's talking about, again, is outside of his control. And I don't think that help is happening. Very last thing I'll say is right after he came out with this, Carl Hastie, the Assembly Speaker, he said, I don't think a bunch of parts of this are happening. Kathy Hochul, the governor who's trying to run for her own term and is in a political marriage of convenience at the moment with Adams, she was careful not to commit to too much. So the help he's asking for from outside the city, I don't think is coming in. And that means he's going to have to use the relatively crude and sometimes destructive policing tools that are available to try to get some control over the situation, which is fundamentally what he was elected on. That he was going to bring back some public
safety. You mentioned something that's real key. You said destructive in a sense. I remember back from the days of Giuliani, and Tim, you can remember this as well, the whole broken windows initiative like that. And there were people that might have been concerned about it, but the city did in fact change for the better as far as many people were concerned. Times Square was cleaned up. You could walk down the street, you didn't see a whole lot of homeless people. Let's not talk about perhaps what happened to them, but the city at least aesthetically changed. Mike, I want to bring you in a minute here on a court of public opinion. And Yancey Roy has just joined us too. He is the Albany Bureau Chief for Newsweek. Yancey, thank you for making it here for the show. Tim, I just want to go back to you for a hot second here when it talks about the issue of balance, but also the issue of being able to implement and institute the kinds of things that Eric Adams wants to do. The mayor is talking about putting more boots on the ground. That's something he does have control over. He may not get the money from the feds, maybe from the state to do everything he wants to do, but the visible presence, perhaps, as far as calming the fears in people's minds who walk these streets are concerned, perhaps that may make a difference. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, flooding areas where there is increased crime with more uniformed police is definitely the answer. As Harry suggested, the citizenry is uncomfortable about riding the subways. They're trying to get, there's an office building behind me down here in Lower Manhattan that hasn't had 10 people in it in the past 2.5 years. They're trying to get people back on the subway system, back on the commuter rail lines. That's going to be crucial to opening up the economy of this region, is to get people back to work. And if people feel unsafe about commuting either on LIRR or the New York City subway systems, these office buildings are going to remain empty. And so getting cops in places where people feel unsafe is going to be important. And Eric Adams knows that, his police commissioner knows that, but where is he going to get those bodies from is going to be the answer that he's got to solve. He came into office with that promise. I have full expectation we're going to see more uniform police officers in places where it's going to make a difference, at least in the minds of the people that are running the city at the moment.
Tim, there are a lot of moving parts here. We're talking about a police department in a total of 50,000 plus people, including civilians, but only cops. We're talking about maybe 36,000. How do you move these people around? And Mike, I want to bring you in on this. In the court of public opinion here, people are concerned. They're scared. They're afraid. I was talking to a friend of mine who works in Midtown the other day, and she was saying, "Hey, look, you walk down the street, you see homeless people all over the place. People are afraid." In the court of public opinion, in your mind, Mike D, do you think that the mayor's rhetoric, and there's still a honeymoon period here, but it's not going to be a long one. Do you think his rhetoric is providing some sense of stability and calm in people's minds when he projects what he wants to do in both the long and the short term?
I think after de Blasio, he certainly does, yes. I think that it was a kind of feeling that de Blasio didn't really know what he was doing, and things tumbled out of control. He inherited a good situation, and things turned rather bad under him. So, no, I think Eric Adams is going to have a very good honeymoon period. I think, and look, maybe economically, as Tim was just saying, and realistically, as Harry was saying, maybe the window is short for him. But politically, he's got 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a lifetime of eternities to turn the city around. So before he has to run for re-election, he has a lot of time. So again, now maybe realistically, as far and economically, as far as the city is concerned, he may not have a lot of time. But politically, he's got a ton of time. And much more than the governor has. I mean, the governor has to run this year. You know,
Yeah, but
so
let me just chime in on that, Mike. You may have a point there, but on the other hand, conversely, he may not. I mean, if people are looking at what's going on now with the first month here, 5 cops shot within less than a month, and the crime rates, as Harry mentioned, have soared, over the last several years. But I think the thing that might save him, and politically, we've got a press now. They've been pretty relentless already. I mean, you've seen the articles and the Daily News and the Post on what's happening with this hire, say with Phil Banks, the whole thing with Norman Siegel, as Caruso, I think it's chief of staff. There are a lot of things now that are kind of under the back burner because of what is happening right now. How long that will be, we don't know.
that's right.
But I think that this whole honeymoon thing may not last too long, and they're going to want to see him do something pretty quick. Yancey, I want to bring you in on this, and Mike, I'm going to come back. I know you had something to say, but I want to bring you in on this as well because this crime issue here in New York expands through the state as well as up to Albany. Of course, the governor has partnered with Mayor Eric Adams in trying to get state police to try to thwart the influx of guns at our borders. How well do you think that's going to work? Because here's my thing. My thing is this. You stop people at the borders, state police. How do you do this? Do you do this by face recognition? Do you do this randomly? I'm thinking there's going to be an influx of all sorts of cases coming in now. I mean, do we turn this into a police state? I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but how do you do this and make it effective at the same time? In your mind, Yancey.
Well, first, let me say sorry for those technical problems that made me a little bit late. So sorry about that, guys. It's interesting to go back for a second about the honeymoon and how long everyone has here. I mean, it's sometimes when you guys were talking about it, I was thinking of this context, and maybe it's part of the world we live in and the sort of 24 hours on all the time, Twitter, et cetera. Doesn't it seem like every politician's honeymoon seems a lot shorter than it used to be? Eric Adams is in the office, 26 days, and we're talking about honeymoon here. Biden's been in office actually 1 year, almost exactly 1 year, and the questions about his honeymoon. I think everything's speeded up because of the nature of the way we live now. And so therefore you've got these questions about, well, how is Adams going to do on this, or how is Adams going to do on that? Certainly Hochul has a shorter time frame, as Mike mentioned, because she is in fact up for election this year. I think it's one of those things, the crimes issue is that it's here and it's here right now. And we've had some incidents, and that's why it's at the forefront. We've also got tied into that a discussion of criminal justice in Albany, because there's competing agendas there, and there's an election. And so you've got people from the right pushing Kathy Hochul on bail and other issues, including from her own party. And at the same time, you've got people pushing from the left to go even further than they have on changing some of the criminal justice laws. So it all adds into this mix right now, and it's a little volatile in terms of seeing exactly how it might play out a few months from now.
Sure. Yancey, thanks for that. Mike, I know you wanted to jump in, but I also have a question for you as well in terms of the court of public opinion, in terms of what you think might be the issue when it comes to honeymoons and how long people have. Do you think perhaps with the whole honeymoon period, is this more a product of the press and people thinking that they have to chime in? Like, say, for instance, when Yancey was saying about President Biden, this year's report card, when he actually has, 3 more years to go, and the majority whip in the House, Jim Clyburn, says, wait, let's don't rush to judgment so soon. Do you think the press is putting more pressure on the public to have a judgment on what's going on with politicians? Are they more to blame in your mind?
Well, I think what Yancey just said is absolutely true about the shortened honeymoon period. I think part of it is that the press used to dictate totally how long that honeymoon period was. Mm-hmm. Now you have social media, you have everybody's got a platform. So the amount of information that can be coming in critical of the newly elected official can certainly put pressure on the press to shorten that honeymoon period. And I think it has. So I think that's absolutely true.
Look, we're going to have to move on. There's so many more things to cover, but I do want to mention something else before before we move on to other issues around the state here. Harry, Harry, you know, we already know what Harry's going to think. He's very vocal. He's going to tell us exactly what's on his mind. But before we get to that, I want to ask you something, Tim. We spent many years, you know, people don't know that Tim and I spent many years on the streets together when I was reporting for Channel 4 and Channel 2 and Channel 11. The unions. The mayor is going to be a tempest in the teapot, I think, because of his former relationship with unions, being a captain in the NYPD, being the head of 100 Blacks in law enforcement. I think that there are a lot of union folk. He wasn't endorsed by the captain's union when he ran for mayor. How do you think he's going to handle policing and dealing with these unions at the same time?
I think it's exactly what Harry brought up, and that's the term balance. What's the baseline? And Yancey brought up, where are we going to get to when we talk about issues like bail reform? Just look at the situation with the correction department. You know, the mayor, Rikers Island, was in crisis, has been in crisis, and most recently, humanitarian crisis for the past many years under a federal monitor, and it's still in crisis. The mayor brings in a new correction commissioner who seems to be more friendly to the correction department and the union. And there is going to be this push-pull. And the biggest question is really going to be, where is the balance? Where is the line? What are you trying to get to? I think in bail reform, it's a little bit more defined. And in crime, it's a little bit more defined. We want to be able to walk down the city and feel safe. We want to ride on the subways and feel safe. We want our police officers to be safe when they respond to calls when we need them. With regard to bail reform, I think it's a much harder arm wrestle, because we need more fairness, but we need to be tough as well. So I don't know. It's sort of a non-answer, Julian, but I do think that this mayor is going to do his best to try and find balance between some of these folks. But we've already seen with the Rikers and the correction department,
Sure.
That he will sort of side, and the police as well, that he will side on the side of the unions.
Before we move on to Albany, just one last question on this I'd just like to pose, and that's, of course, Alvin Bragg. He's been much maligned, I think, in the press over bail reform and other issues about releasing people who have not been involved in violent crimes. The mayor has said himself, look, he cannot control the DAs in the city. He really can't. So the question is, you know, how does he deal with these DAs? How does he deal with an Alvin Bragg? And is Alvin Bragg really that far off, Harry, in your mind in terms of what he wants to do? He's talking about, look, if you have a gun in your hand and you're committing a violent crime, you're going to get locked up. You're not going to be let out. I think that a lot of this, perhaps in my mind, has been more politicized than anything else. What is your thought?
Alvin Bragg ran for district attorney in this crowded field. And he said, I'm going to put out a day one memo doing a bunch of these things. And then he won that race, didn't generate all that much attention, despite the fact, by the way, the Manhattan DA is leading this criminal probe of Donald Trump. I think because the mayor's race sucked a lot of it up for complicated reasons involving the fact that state races, there's no runoff. It's just, you know, whoever gets the most votes. It was only Manhattan. There was a bunch of other stuff going on. And so these attacks came very late, and there was this attempt by conservatives within the Democratic Party and outside of it, led largely by the New York Post, and then Fox News jumped in. They had 24 stories about him in a week to make this black guy, who's the Manhattan district attorney, the face of the Democratic Party. And to say, you know, he wants people who are doing terrible things to just be walking the street. He has no interest in any sort of balance. It was cartoonish. Bragg, I think in a lot of ways, allowed for this. He put out the memo and he didn't talk about it. He may not have been expecting the sort of level of heat it received. There were some specific things in the memo you could argue with, but this seemed really political and short term. And again, we're in January, speaking of honeymoon periods. And you know, the Post has had multiple stories trying to directly tie Bragg, his memo, and his policies directly to decisions that have involved dangerous people out in the street. So this is the same playbook they've been using. And it's not always wrong, by the way, with bail reform, with criminal justice reforms generally, with anything that is less aggressive policing, is look, somebody dangerous got out. This terrible person did a bad thing. Do we want this to keep happening? So the Post is a stop clock. That clock right now is banging on Alvin Bragg and Eric Adams, who's also talking about balance, a little from the other side, but similarly is aware that this could end up being him, that he could be the black face of the Democratic Party nationally for these midterm elections. If those end up revolving around crime, if things continue to feel dangerous and out of hand here. And I think the two of them have mutual interest in showing that you can do both things, keep the city safe, and not dragnet people unnecessarily, stop them, arrest them, harass them, throw them into the criminal justice system at the same time. But again, that is easier to say than to do, and that's going to be the challenge for both of them. But neither man wants a direct confrontation, is my view.
Harry, you mentioned something about New York Post, and they're just not the only ones here. And I think that's really important in this discussion about the tail wagging the dog here. Okay, and what I mean by that is our fourth estate is not what it used to be. And Tim, I think you can probably agree with this, I think, and that the state of journalism outside, of course, WCBS radio, is not really what it used to be. We were on the streets together, you had a certain ethic when it came to reporting. Now you've got like 500 outlets, you've got information coming from everywhere. Nobody knows what to believe. Every outlet, for the most part, has an agenda. If you talk about the Post being more conservative, the Daily News being, say, more liberal, the question is who you believe. And in the court of public opinion, how do you formalize any kind of opinion when you've got so many things coming at you? Mike, this is the question for you specifically, because people right now in this city, state, and country are so apathetic. Let's just talk about how many people are actually involved in the system. You're a pollster. This last mayoral election, I think it was like 23 or 26% of registered voters voted. The national election, the last one with Trump, we had 62%. That was a lot in people's minds, but like almost 40% of registered voters didn't vote. The biggest ones before that was 2008 with President Barack Obama. It was like 52 or 57%. People are not involved in the system, but yet and still everybody has an opinion, but they're not involved.
It's a really good point, Julian, especially for these elections coming up, the midterm elections, that something that people don't often look at is that in the midterm elections, New York City's turnout is typically in the 20s. So I know we're moving into Albany here and the state races, but when you say, I think we all have this kind of idea that a Republican can't win, or it's a real big long shot for a Republican to win statewide, and it is. But if the Democratic Party keeps moving too far to the left on issues like bail reform, and look, that was the message of election night last year. The Democratic Party took it on the chin nationally in the suburbs on law and order issues and things like defund the police and cashless bail, and the moderate purple voters that live in the suburbs said enough. Like I called it that night, the revenge of the suburbs. I said that tonight, if it was a movie, we'd call it Revenge of the Suburbs. It's a message to the Democratic Party: you've gone too far to the left on safety and law and order and safe neighborhood issues that we care about. But at this point, the city's caring about these things too, and it's also noteworthy to say that Eric Adams got elected as a moderate Democrat, and the number 2 person was a moderate Democrat. Progressives didn't do well, and they're running Albany right now, and to a large degree, this is what Hochul has to deal with. She has to deal with a legislature that is dominated by progressives. And so far, she's been managed to do the State of the Union address and the budget address and ignore the number 1 issue, why her party took it on the chin in last November's elections, which is bail reform. She hasn't mentioned it. And if she had her way, she won't mention it. But it ain't going to happen. Eventually, she's going to have to answer the question. And when she does, Jumaane Williams is ready to pounce on the left, and Tom Suozzi is ready to pounce on the right. So, this is like literally the hand grenade without the pin in this election that is ready to drop that she has to deal with.
Mike D, you're going down a slippery slope here when you talk about bail reform and those issues that are supposedly positioned as left-leaning issues. I think a lot of these things are more issues that the Democrats don't know how to fight and position themselves. I mean, you look at Biden, for instance, okay, and we got to get to Yancey, in a minute here. But you look at Biden, they're saying he's weak. Okay, the Republicans are saying he's weak. He's been ineffective. He can't put two sentences together. Even Laura Curran said that. I have a whole thing about her. That's another issue. But is this really true? When you talk about, hold on, wait, when you talk about the infrastructure bill, okay, that's something that's been bantered around for decades. No one's been able to do it. He passed it. And then you have Republicans that didn't vote for it, but they go back to their states. Oh, look what we're doing here for bridges and roads and all this kind of stuff. And they didn't even vote for it. Even with bail reform itself, okay? Some might suggest that there's certain issues in there that could be left-leaning, but if you're talking about Bragg himself, who basically said, look, for hardcore crimes, we're going to be hard on it. The things that, they're nonviolent. I mean, is that really left-leaning? What does that have to do with, two officers getting killed on the streets or homeless people attacking folks and issues of mental health? I just think that the Democrats don't know how to position themselves to really put out the message. You have Biden. He's not going anywhere. He's saying, okay, I'm going to come out now and I'm going to head out and get him. Where was he before? He should have been out there. I just don't think they get their message out there well, credibly enough to make people understand exactly what they're doing. Maybe I'm wrong. I see Harry up there smiling.
Julian, let me just jump in and give you a 20-second answer, because you just answered your own question. Okay, the rule in politics is this. Okay, if you have a choice between perception and reality, and it's nice when they meet, but if they don't, and you have a choice, you'll take perception every time in politics. Okay, and the perception here is that the Democrats have been too progressive at the same time that crime is going up. And that's right. A perception problem. And you actually answered your own question.
Right. No, and you're right about that. That's my problem with the Democrats. They do not know how to put a message out there. The perception is that they are weak. Okay, let's move on from that for right now. We got to move on to what's going on in the state here. Kathy Hochul, Yancey, front and center, my friend. With Tish James just bowed out. Tom Suozzi is still sending out a barrage of emails. I'm getting 10 a day from him on what he's trying to do and raise money. Do you think she has a chance at this point? Is there any really strong person that may come up against her for governor?
Well, I think that everyone, left or right, would probably agree that she is at minimum in a very commanding position right now. It doesn't mean she's a lock. It doesn't mean lots of things can't happen between now and primary day or election day. But she's in a commanding position for various reasons. And you want to start with the fact that she's the incumbent and she's in the job and she's got the title, which always helps, A. B, it helps you raise a lot of money. As we just saw in the last posting, she raised almost $22 million. That was more than everybody running against her combined. And so obviously people are lining up behind her financially. She's in pretty decent standing in the polls. She's got a large lead in the Democratic primary right now. And the other thing to mention here is that she's got a budget surplus, which is, as Mike and Harry would know, is unheard of most of the time in New York. Most of the time, these guys finish a budget somewhere around April 1, the ink is dry, and a couple of hours later, you're making projections about how much the shortfall is going to be next year. But because of the big federal stimulus on the pandemic, and because the economic projections from last year were conservative in terms of how fast the tax receipts would pick up, she's got a surplus. And so from now through the rest of the year, she's going to be able to go around to the state, upstate, downstate, New York City, and talk about what they were able to do with the budget. And so that's a powerful tool for an incumbent to have. So you put all of those together, and she is in at minimum a commanding position right now. But it doesn't mean that it's a lock. As everyone knows, there's lots of issues that can come up. Certainly in the primary, she's got Williams coming at her from the left, and she's got Swazi coming at her from the right. So there are a lot of cards to play. Let me also throw this out before I stop. In a few weeks, we're going to have political conventions for both parties. And something to note there is, how do you get onto the ballot? How does a challenger get onto the ballot? If you're Hochul or if you're Lee Zeldin on the Republican side, because he's got so many endorsements, those guys are going to get the minimum of a 25% vote at the convention, and they will be on. All these other challengers, Swazi, Williams, Rob Astorino, Andrew Giuliani, how do you get on the ballot? Right now, they might have a very hard time achieving 25% at the convention. So that means you got to gather thousands of petitions, and that costs a lot of money, and you don't have a lot of time to do it. So that's going to be the next little milestone, is the convention and what happens with other people actually trying to get on the ballot to run a challenge. It's kind of an insider's story right now, but it's going to be really important as to what that ballot looks like in not only in June, but then in November.
All right, I think that's good. That's a great assessment, Yancey. At this particular point, I think the governor, she's not in a heavyweight fight, say for instance, like Mayor Adams is. The issues that he's facing here, there are multiple, there are a multitude of issues. Her thing, right now, I think, outside of being hit by the left and the right, I think she probably has a good chin. We'll see. It's the issue of mask mandates right now. That's the big thing here. Of course, we know just recently now that apparently it's been upheld that, the mask mandates will hold, at least for now anyway. We'll see about this. But I guess as we go down the road here, and things, of course, are changing, by the second these days, I'm going to put a poll out for you guys. And Mike, I want to start with you, and Tim, I want to ask you, this is Harry as well. I think right now, in terms of this race for governor, and I still say that Kathy Hochul has not truly been tested yet, I'd say probably the biggest thorn of her side will be Tom Swazi. Why? Because, Mike, you talked about perception. Mike is perceived as being not a snake oil salesman, but he can be a little slippery, but he also puts out a pretty good message. In your estimation right now, we have a little ways to go. Who do you think will be the greatest challenge to Kathy Hochul for governor? Mike, I want to start with you.
Well, I think it really is how we get through the primary process, how she gets through it. Does she come out healthy? Not having been attacked too far, not having been dragged too far to the left or to the right. I think that politics is a series of battles, and you have to win the one that's in front of you first. You don't get to go fight the next one until you win the one that's in front of you. So she's got to get through this primary in good shape, and she's got to get through this primary not being dragged too far to the left or too far to the right. Clearly, she wants to stay, more as a moderate Democrat. She wants to attract those voters from Western New York, and she wants to attract those voters from Long Island. And Yancey said it. She's got a lot of money to do it. Those regions have traditionally, rightfully felt that they have been shorted on their share of investment dollars from Albany. And they feel that way because it happens to be the truth. And now, she's got a lot of money to spread around the state and buy a lot of goodwill. And, so maybe Long Island will never like cashless bail or bail reform. But she's given them property tax relief, and they like that. So she's got a lot of arrows in the quiver to use here to get through the primary process. I agree. I think Swazi is probably the one that's going to be the biggest thorn in her side, because he's trying to ride the issue that was the number one determinative issue from last November. Which is law and order issues, and anti-defund the police and anti-cashless bail. He's a very smart politician. Tom is. He's a political animal. He saw what happened in November, and he's trying to ride that, and he's hoping that issue stays as hot as it was last November, and that makes him potentially the biggest thorn in his side. So, and now, as far as like the Republicans are concerned, we're going to, and I agree with Yancey that the petition process makes it unlikely that anybody but Lee Zeldin is going to end up being her opponent. You have to gather 15,000 valid signatures to be safe. You usually have to get 30. I've done it twice. It is a tremendous job. It is in the state of New York, and it's a very short window, as Yancey said. So it's a big job. I think at this point we can look at Lee Zeldin as as presumptive opponent, and Lee needs to start moving to the middle. If
Ain't gonna happen.
well, then, you know what? Then he's probably not going to be governor. If he doesn't stop, he has to be a viable alternative to those moderate independent voters and moderate Democratic voters. And if he doesn't start moderating and move more toward the middle, he's not going to make himself a viable alternative to the Democratic Party.
Mike, he needs a new slogan like Tom Suozzi had. He tries to appeal to conservatives. I'm a Democrat that gets things done. Okay, whatever that means. I don't know. Tim, and Harry, I want to get to you too. Tim, your assessment.
Well, I think what I would refer to what Yancey said a few minutes ago, and that is the biggest threat to Kathy Hochul in the coming year is Kathy Hochul. Any mistakes she makes. I think Suozzi obviously is a smart guy, a great politician. I give you credit, Julian, because in this 45 minutes that we've discussed, we have yet to really talk about the pandemic. And I think that might be one of the things that Kathy Hochul will have going for her, is because I think we're about to ride on a bit of a wave of recovery. And I think that's going to open up both the economy. We're going to feel better about it until the next variant comes along. And maybe what we went through this winter or this past holiday season will prepare us for how to do that. Her biggest issue with regard to this mask issue with Blakeman was, it's a risk reward thing. That's Blakeman's argument. If you hear him all the way, that he thinks the damage being done to kids is more severe than the harm it will save. And you can argue that all day, but I think what's going to happen is Kathy Hochul at some point in time is going to, lift the mandates in greater society, maybe not in schools anytime soon. And I think that's an advantage that she probably will enjoy come June, certainly, that she will be in office and riding a wave of a pandemic recovery, at least in the coming months.
Well, I have 2 words for that. Stay tuned. But we'll see on that. But we're going to get to mask or not to mask. That's the question. But Sir Harry, I want to also get your assessment also on this governor's race. Who do you think will remain front runner, at least at this point anyway, in your opinion?
So Kathy Hochul is in a tremendously enviable position. I worked for Tom Suozzi on his last gubernatorial campaign, which did not, I helped get him from A to A and back again against Elliot Spitzer. I think one big thing Kathy Hochul has going for her, and the masking actually ties into this, is as Yancey was saying, like these honeymoon periods have become very short. She's done a masterful job of extending hers, first by tapping into big money and Cuomo's donor base to have an overwhelming enough lead that, for instance, Tish James decides not to run, which really clears the path for her. And then she no longer has emergency powers, which is why you had that initial court ruling against the mask mandate for schools. But there's an implicit state of emergency. And that means that she has this less fettered executive authority of a sort that's rare, that I'm the person who's giving the information. She's the closest thing to the person who's actually calling the shots. And with these waves, which have become to some extent predictable, you sort of know that there's an end in sight. And so if you're able to hold the course, and by the way, she's picked up a ton from Cuomo's playbook, straight down to like the PowerPoint presentations in a briefing, and she's refined it and tweaked it and made it her own, but she's borrowed a lot there. That she is the person in command. She has this one budget coming up before her own election. By the way, the primary is in June now. So we're really on a short clock here for anyone else to even drag her, like forget about winning, but force her to take a position she then has to account for in November. And if we're right, and I would agree that Suozzi is actually the greater threat right now, that's actually, she survives the primary, very helpful to her in the general. If she does get pulled just a little farther to the right on one or two things than she otherwise would be. And this may also end up being very helpful for Adams if it means she's willing to use this budget big ugly and some of the pressure she can bring to bear there on the legislature to help Adams with this crime agenda in New York. So I think she's in a really politically enviable position if she doesn't get in her own way and outside events don't intercede. But we will see.
Well, I tell you, Harry, one thing I think that bodes well for her is the primary is coming up, as you said, in June. That's not a whole lot of time. So there's not a whole lot of time necessarily to attack her and get information out there that might be not so good for her. Tom Swazi said at one place that, you got to give people information at a rate that they can absorb. All right. And I think some people may be a little bit overwhelmed now with what's going on. Speaking of information, we want to get to the mask. To mask or not to mask, that is the question. If I can use that Shakespearean. Eric Clapton, and I'm going somewhere with this guy. He comes out and claims people vaccinated against COVID-19 are under hypnosis. That was big headlines. I saw this morning. Of course, King James, LeBron James, was talking at a press conference a couple of months ago. Well, I did my research. I didn't know he had a doctorate from Johns Hopkins.
Right.
I guess the question is now, what is ruling people's minds? Is it politics or is it science when it comes to the issue of masking? I'm kind of confused. I just want to throw this out there to everybody. Yancey, I want to start with you first on this and your thoughts about the whole issue of masking and what's going on in the courts and what people are thinking in their minds, parents with kids in school here on Long Island, is a big issue. What are your thoughts?
Well, let's just start with the simple part of that, which is the court case. We're here talking a day after a stay was put on a lower court ruling. So the mask mandate is in right now. There's going to be a hearing Friday in the appellate division,
Right.
which is a mid-level court. It hasn't even gone up to the highest court yet. It could be, the mandate could be upheld. It could be thrown out. Certainly when the opponents filed this case, they looked for a favorable venue and found it with a mostly conservative judge in Nassau to get the initial ruling. We don't know exactly how the appellate division will rule, but keep in mind also, someone mentioned that the mask mandate, probably goes away at some point, maybe very soon, maybe next month. So you might have a situation where the issue kind of goes away in terms of what happens, even if the court case continues. And then you got to wonder, how long will that still be a political issue, the mask or not? So there's a lot of things to be played out there. Then in terms of the sort of pop culture question, I mean, not to go too broad here, but I mean, someone mentioned before, everyone has a platform, everyone has social media. You get a stream of things that land in your inbox, or when you sign on to whatever, Facebook or Instagram, which is such a different world than it was, a generation or two ago, where you had, go back 2 generations and you had 3 networks and your daily paper. And then one generation, you had cable news in the beginning of the internet. And so as far as what people follow, I don't know if you can even put it in such a broad category as science versus pop culture. It's sort of, everything's so diverse that, there's thousands or millions of outlets now. And I think that's part of what you see, so many scattered opinions from the far left to the far right about an issue like mask or vaccines. And I know that's probably too general of an answer, but I think that's sort of what you see is going on there.
Well, but Tim, it still boils down to what information people are getting. You're a news director and programmer. And you were charged with, as a member of the Fourth Estate, trying to get the very best information out there, the factual information, so people can make an informed decision. But we have right now that you're competing, as a radio station, the disseminator of information, other outlets that are putting out information that might have different thoughts, different facts than what you have. To me, it's like a kind of dilemma. What do you do when there are people out there that may be very sincere, but are sincerely wrong? How do you deal with this?
It's a multi-tiered question. I'll say a couple of things. I think we've done ourselves harm over the years by blurring the line between opinion and full news. So I've got all the cable channels up and a television in my office in here. And many of the 24-hour cable stations are doing more opinion than really straight news. There may, we all may be able to figure out that a reporter out at the scene somewhere is talking about the facts of a story, and then they go to a round table where there's a lot of opinion. And I think we've done ourselves harm by not identifying some of that in our content. On the news side, our goal should be to deliver the facts as we know them and let people make decisions. And I know that's sort of the age-old formula for good journalism. But I think that in reality, when we talk to our audiences, we should make sure that consumers consume multiple of sources. I watch Fox every day because I want to see what they're talking about. I watch CNN every day because I want to see what they're talking about. I listen to our competitors. I want to know everything. And I get most of my news these days from Twitter because I see articles that are suggested by Harry or by Yancey, or I want to see what everybody's reading, and then I want to make my own choices. And I really think that's the future of what we do for a living. And the success of a station like ours is to admit that we're an aggregator, and we do talk to Harry from time to time, and we do talk to Yancey from time to time, and we should talk to Mike from time to time. But the two of those folks know that, we don't know it all. And we want to hear what Harry has to say, and we want to know what Yancey can tell us about Albany. And I think that's the formula for our success.
Yeah, but see, Tim, here's why I see the problem. See, you're a newsman. You're an informed person. I think there's a small percentage of people that are informed, that they're looking and watching different things to make an opinion, because you can't really have an opinion if you're looking at one thing. Now, I used to work for Fox News Channel, as you know, as an anchor of the Fox and Friends weekend show. I don't watch Fox anymore. I just can't watch them anymore. It's unwatchable as far as I'm concerned. That being said, though, what you're saying intellectually makes sense, but most people don't do that. And that's why everybody's compartmentalized now. And we have a country where everybody's at each other's throats because they're not willing to listen to anybody else. I guess the question is, how do we get beyond that?
So, I'll shut up after saying this. I think we contribute to that as well, so that we may knee-jerk say that we don't agree with what Bruce Blakeman is saying. He is the elected leader of Nassau County, and we need to hear what he has to say. Which is exactly what we've done. We heard what he has to say. We've listened to him. We've given to him a forum, and we've put others on alongside him to try and let people decide. And we don't say Bruce is an idiot. That he's making decisions that don't make sense in the face of science. He's actually fairly reasonable when you think about, like, the world is crazy. It's been turned upside down by the pandemic, and our kids are being harmed. And so, the flaw in his argument, really, I think, is that he's looking for Kathy Hochul to give him the science that she used to make the decision. And I think, I don't think that's his job. I think it is to challenge her to find out, when will you lift this and based on what? And I think that's a smart thing for him to do. But I think that we need to listen to each other a little bit more instead of just shouting at each other. And I think we're all hopefully contributing to that in this.
I could spend so much time on this. Mike, I wanted to ask you something more about that as well, but we're running out of time here, and I don't want to take too much of your time. I know all of you have things to do. Tim, you got to get back to doing what you're doing. Mike, you're polling people. Harry, you're giving everybody your opinion. And Yancey, you've got to attend to what's going on there in Albany. I just want to focus on a couple of things here on Long Island. The Democratic Party, this last election, we saw some catastrophic losses on Long Island, most notably, of course, Laura Curran. I have some issues with her, but do you think Laura lost because there was a difference of opinion with her, or perhaps maybe she just didn't run a good campaign? Harry, I want to start with you.
I think sometimes there are these wave elections. Swazi actually got hit by one prior to jumping back on in Congress, where the what happens with individual candidates isn't as significant as sort of the swing between parties in places where there's still viable general elections, which is not a lot of New York State, but I think happily, healthily continues to be the case in Long Island. So that's hard to separate. If I can go back just very quickly to this question of following science and authority in journalism, I just wanted to say that some of this is very chicken and eggy. That we've had, the CDC saying, don't touch things and wash your hands. You have to wear masks. Don't wear masks. Herky jerky all around. And of course, the scientists are not making those decisions, and we don't actually want them to. You want politicians translating those and then making decisions based on that science, but that are fundamentally political decisions. Like, how many lives do we want to save compared to how many businesses do we want to close down? And how many kids we want to knock out of going to school in person. Those are cost benefits that are fundamentally political. But unfortunately, when there's a deterioration in the science and in the people who are supposed to be the voices of authority, it opens up tremendous space for people to question that. And the most successful questioners frequently are not people who have compelling counter science, other data of their own, who are looking at the facts, but are just demagogues saying, look at these jerks. We can't trust what they're putting out, and are seeding suspicion. And how we get out of that dynamic is very difficult. As an opinion journalist, I'm the opinion editor at the Daily Beast. I read an opinion column for the Daily News. I do think there's a serious problem with too much opinion, and people having difficulty just figuring out what the underlying facts are. And if you can start with some agreement or common understanding there, that helps. And that really means that the scientists who are giving guidance have to be outside of the political process. And last thing there, this was very bad under Trump, and he had his insane press conferences. And then Andrew Cuomo won an Emmy counter-programming those and saying a lot about science, even as he was making some terrible decisions here, in my view. But this didn't improve that actual part under Biden. We didn't jump on testing. We haven't had clear guidance. And again, this just opens up space for suspicion in a way I think is deeply unhealthy. And I'm hoping there's some answer there, but we're definitely not going to figure it out in the remaining minutes of this panel. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, the remaining minutes of this panel, I just want to get to a couple more things here that we're going to have to close. You mentioned something, Harry, about a deterioration of science. I mean, I don't know. I would kind of question that. How do we know there's a deterioration of science? Do we believe the CDC or don't we? Or do we believe what a politician says? Or do we believe what Eric Clapton says? Or what King James says? I mean, who do we believe these days? Who's the doctor? I'm a doctor now. I'm gonna tell you what I believe. If you want to take, I'll sell you the Brooklyn Bridge as far as I'm concerned. But I mean, at this point, it's all over the place, especially when it comes, especially with respected outlets like the Tim Scheld has head up. And we just don't see enough of that out there as far as I'm concerned these days. Listen, we've covered a number of issues here. We can certainly cover more. I wanted to get into also what's happening overseas right now. We're on the brink, perhaps, hopefully not of war with Ukraine. President Biden has 8,500 troops on alert. We got our NATO forces that are also aligned with us. There was an article today that I was looking at with Trump and how he played into this by basically downplaying NATO and praising Russia. I mean, we could go on and on all day, but I want to focus on one thing here, and then we can close on this for today at least. We talked about the issue of what we hear, what we want to believe, how people ingest this information, especially when it comes to pollsters and opinion and stuff like that. Let's focus back now on two things. It covers both politics and it covers the media. And it covers a tale of two brothers, Andrew and Chris Cuomo. Both now are maligned. Both are without jobs, even though one has probably about $8 million that's pocket in the war chest. The question is, can these two rebound in any way? Might we see Andrew Cuomo, who I thought did some good things for the state, might he come back? Might Chris Cuomo come back? This covers both politics and the media. I want to get an answer from every one of you and what you think. Mike, I want to start with you.
Of course they can come back. I mean, the only you're only dead in politics when you decide to lay down and die. History is full of examples from Lincoln to Churchill of who had their political obituaries written and then came back and in fact ascended the heights and higher than they were before. So of course there's always can be a second act, a third act. For Andrew Cuomo, it's tough to see what that act might be because he's been the governor of the state of New York. The only job really above that is president. It might be tough to see that he'd run for president, but could he come back in a heading a think tank of some kind? Absolutely. And Chris Cuomo is the media. I mean, as we all know today, the media is driven by money. It's driven by ratings. So, if he can generate ratings, and I think eventually he will be able to, yeah, of course they both can come back. Absolutely.
Tim, might we see Chris Cuomo on WCBS radio?
Oh, I can't make judgments about personnel decisions on a Zoom call. But I think Mike's right. I think that, we would be foolish to call either of them gone for good, and especially Chris. I would say, I don't mean this disrespectfully to anyone, but one only needs to look at, Jeffrey Toobin up on CNN from time to time to know that you can come back no matter what your mistake is. And the issue is going to be every time you look at Jeffrey Toobin on CNN, you can't forget, what went on. And
Right.
I feel bad for a guy like that, but that's what you have to overcome when you come back.
Sir Harry.
Andrew Cuomo, he has all this political money, campaign money, and he really hasn't gone away. He's been mounting an active defense of the investigation in which he voluntarily resigned, questioning this as the evidence has come out, trickled out from Tish James's office, I think often offering a fairly compelling counter case to individual parts of it without getting to the broader picture of his behavior. And I'd say the 6 significant allegations that were substantiated there, some of them were sort of a lesser scale. But he doesn't have anything else he wants to do. He can't go away. And the Democratic Party being what it is at the moment, he can't get appointed, attorney general at some point or nominated for the Supreme Court. I don't think he has a thing to do. And I think he's very hurt about what happened to his reputation, and going to fight this to the end. And he has the money to do so. Chris Cuomo, I agree. He's a media guy. And by the way, he got massively rewarded for the stuff that ended up taking him out not that long before. He had Andrew on a show, and it was the Brothers show. Speaking of any line between news and everything else, when your brother's the governor, that's a pretty wild thing. If you're even nominally a newsman or a news person, so it's rough. I would bluntly, me and my brother would not be in that set of positions. But if there was anything vaguely parallel and it came down to my position in the world or my position with my family, I do understand going with family. And we'll see what happens from here. But that is a rough fall.
Yancey, you have the last word.
Rebounds are always possible, like Mike said. I mean, if you want to take a long view, let's mention Biden, for example. Just look at his trajectory. Those of us, we're all old enough to remember that he was briefly a rising star in the '88 campaign. Hey, maybe this guy might win. He flamed out as quickly as he rose. Kind of just stayed as a sort of run-of-the-mill senator for a long time. And then all of a sudden he's vice president. Then he's going to go off into retirement. And then here we are and he's president. Rebounds are always possible. I agree with, I believe it was Mike said, what would you come back to if you're Andrew Cuomo? And would you want to even be governor again? It's hard to predict, although, it's interesting that the Cuomo communications operations are always very focused on the snapshot and the headline of what a story is, right? So come back to be governor again? I don't know. That would be quite the snapshot in the headline. I don't know that he'd be interested in that, but I agree with the other guys saying that, any comeback is kind of possible these days. No one's team seems to be written out sort of forever.
I'll tell you what, I'll make a national prediction getting away from local. I think that Biden will make a big comeback once the infrastructure bill gets into fruition and other things happen, I think that we will. But that's, once again, that's just my humble opinion. Listen, guys, this has been great. I think a great session. We covered a lot of ground. We could have covered a lot more. Real and Powerful, the Fair Media Council, an all-star, real and powerful group of panelists here: Mike Dawidziak, Tim Scheld, Harry Siegel, and Yancey Roy. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this. And once again, we need to do this again sometime. Take care.
Great.